is ending. Again, and again, and again.
Constantly in flux, shifting, distorting, always reborn as something worse.
Destruction by ecological catastrophes, the fallout of history's belligerence, by modern man-made miseries, or the blood spilled by the reckless machine of capitalist supremacy.
Mankind's greatest ability truly is to destroy itself in creative ways, designer demise, consumer customized death, endlessly on repeat.
Poisonous space rocks,
nuclear weapons,
cyclical revolutions, warring nations, warring corporations, warring neighbors,
pandemics, tsunamis, volcanoes.
In between it all,
direct person-machine interfaces,
tactical neural implants,
and bacteria from outer space hijacking intercellular nanorobotics.
And the skies full of ads.
Everyone is interfaced,
injected,
infected,
infested with something.
Everyone wants something from everyone else.
Everyone is a liar and a cheat.
Everyone wants more creds.
Welcome to the year 20X3. Welcome to the city of the Psy.
So begins Cyborg by STOCKHOLM KARTELL. This game is an old-school role-playing system obsessed with the end of the world and all of the dark depravity that comes with it. The characters you play are not heroes, they're nobodies. They have a debt they need repaid, and they need to get the credits to do so. They are a combination of civilians, hackers, technomancers, nanomancers, people who are infected, who are poor, who are suffering, and who inevitably will die with the world they live in. This is Cyborg. To begin, let's talk about the idea of what the system is. This game is a rules-light, so-called old-school roleplay system, or OSRS for short. It is based on a D20 system for checks, and it uses a variety of the other die for damage, not too dissimilar to how D&D does it. The larger your gun, the larger the die you'll roll to do damage with it, and likely the more damage that you will end up doing over time with such an item. This game is unique in the fact that most of the rules in the book, if they are not specifically noted, are implied. So in combat, for example, the book never specifies when you are supposed to roll armor. So your armor has a dice value, like a D2 or 4 or 6, that you roll when you take damage. But that's only implied. It's ideal that you just dodge the damage altogether, and the system seems to far more likely support you doing that rather than to go through the process of taking that damage. There are optional combat modifiers as well that you can add. However, the majority of this game is intended, at the very least in its ground state, to be run as a bare bones, action heavy, and ultimately extremely deadly role-playing game. Death in this game is handled differently than your average tabletop game. Death is permanent, however, death does not come easily. So unlike other games where you would be rolling death saving throws and the like, the moment you go to 0, you roll a D8. And there are several things that can happen when that D8 is rolled. You either go unconscious, go into something called a psi rage, which isn't that different from a cyber psychosis in a game like Cyberpunk Red, or you are knocked into a state where it's more difficult to do things and you will bleed out in a certain number of hours that you roll on at the time that you roll that result, or you are dead with an asterisk. There's a 50% chance that even if you roll this dead result, a medical team will come to try and rescue you if you have at least 1,000 credits in your bank account. If you don't have that, they won't bother. This is a capitalist society after all, and they are the enemy. However, if they make it to you and you do have the money to pay them, they will bring you back to life. But if you go negative, in other words, you go beyond that 0 point of health and you go to -1 or 2, God forbid any more than that, each negative counts an extra 0 on the bill. So it starts at 1,000, then to 10,000, then 100,000. And all of a sudden your medical debt is going to cripple you to the point that you wish you had died anyway. So much for this being a game, right? So let's talk about building a character. We've talked about how they die, but how are they made? How do they live? There are several classes in this game. I believe there are 6 in total. And they range from magicians utilizing the infection of an alien bacteria to technomancers wielding the power of droids and vehicles to hackers to even just abandoned gangers. And so this variety of classes leads to a variety of play styles and benefits and downsides that each must take in order to do their thing. The other side of this is that you can play a classless character and therefore end up with better stats than anyone with a stated class. But everything now becomes a very, very difficult thing for you to decide on how to focus. You have to get the stuff that they take for granted. If you want nano powers, you've got to go find them. If you want access to apps, you need to go design or buy them. If you want access to tech, you have to take it. This gets hard, as one might imagine. So it's a good thing that everything in this game is run by random die. So beyond choosing your class, you roll for everything from your stats to your starting health pool to your starting items. And the only thing that classes do is influence those values to a certain degree. And then essentially take it from there for you to decide on whether or not you are going to have a lot of expertise or if you're a rogue amateur at what you do. Because again, the dice decide that primary stat that you take, you don't choose it. When a character is rolled, you also roll with them a debt and the organization to whom that debt is owed. There are consequences that come along with this. Some are that you simply have to allow for a gang to stay in your house at will until you repay your debt to them. Others might be far darker, a corporation hunting for you, or the police wanting to arrest you. And therefore, these debts must be repaid as quickly as possible. So to this end, you're going to run on missions. So there is one at the back of the book, the Lucky Flight Casino, which I will talk about in a moment, as that's the one that my crew and I ran through when we played the game. But there is another one available on the Cyborg website, Reaper Repo, that follows a very similar set of instructions. And as you might imagine, it is very lightweight. There are a couple of NPCs that get thrown into the mix that a dice will decide which ones appear or don't appear. However, the majority of the mission is going to be looking for a specific goal, and then we just get to see what kind of things happen around that. And sometimes, like was the case with the Lucky Flight Casino, different times of day indicate different criteria for the people being there or not being there. And so a room that you walk into while the casino is open will be lively and therefore be far easier to navigate without being noticed. Whereas if you go after hours, after everyone's left, and all that's left there is the security detail and the cleaning crew, anytime you get spotted is a moment of panic. And so now we talk through the mission itself that we ran on. You can roll random ones, but we decided to run one out of the back of the book simply because I've never GM'd or played the system before. And being that I'm a GM who likes punishment, I decided I was going to give this one a shot, going in blind. So we started by rolling up 3 characters. We had my friends Evan, Logan, and Connor. Connor, some of you may recognize from Neon Inferno. He has been a guest on that a couple times now, and he also was part of our one-shot for the Vendit heist, on which I will have a video coming out soon for those of you who couldn't make the live show. So the 3 of them in order, Evan rolled a renegade cyber slasher, a bit of a tank, martial artist, meditative, and also psychopathic. They are melee experts, and so he's kind of like a cyber ninja, you could think of it. He was our tank. He had about 10 health, I think maybe even a little more, maybe about 13. And so as we went through the gig, he's the one who took the most risk because he could afford to take the hits. We had Connor, who was playing our orphan gearhead, And these are a class that use either a grafted or supportive piece of technology to aid in what they are doing. So Connor's character is using a drone, and this drone had a laser turret on it, which is pretty cool, and it came in handy later on. And then at the end of everything, we have Logan, who rolled up a shunned nanomancer, and this shunned nanomancer had exactly 1 HP and 1 nano power. So as you can imagine, this was not great for him, and this will come into play later. So the crew is given a mission by a man by the name of Charlie Sands, who has sent them to the Lucky Flight Casino after the neighborhood he has lived in for quite a while has been suddenly sunk into a debt relationship with this casino. They are quickly being driven under by it. And so as a result, Charlie wants you to go in and he wants you to wipe the debt off their records. He wants you to find their offline server, wipe it, and he said if the casino goes down in the process of this, he's not going to cry any tears. He just warns the crew against massacring the masses inside, saying that it will add additional complication and unnecessary attention to what should otherwise be a covert operation. So, with that information, the crew enters the casino after talking with some homeless people outside to get a feel for when the most people are present inside. And they get the sense of when the doors are open, when they are not. And so as they walk inside, a young woman receives a large jackpot from one of the card tables near the entrance. And coming up behind her is someone who would pickpocket her. And they leverage this into saving her from the pickpocket in exchange for a little information. And she mentions that their secondary objective, a man named Batu, who Charlie has warned the crew about, was a man that he sent in a few days prior and has not come back. She mentions that she's not seen Batu, but she did see someone getting dragged downstairs earlier into what are the basement levels of the complex. And so as such, the crew decides to leave the front of the building and then head around the back where there's one guard. They quickly convince him to leave with a little bit of violence and brandishing of their weapons. They break through the door courtesy of Logan's Shun Nanomancer and his ability to turn inanimate objects to dust. He has one power and that's it. So he's their lockpicker for this gig. They walk through the door into what would be the green room for the backstage area of the stage, which is actually above them now. They can hear the pounding of bass and instruments through the floor. And so as they navigate through this section of the building, they end up leaving through a hallway that connects to the security room. The security room is immediately adjacent to a couple things, most notably a maintenance chasm, described in the book as a yawning expanse of blackness lit by a galaxy of spotlights. And on the other end of this is a giant machine, the power core, which runs the whole casino, as it is off the grid. So when the crew finds their way into this guard room, they immediately start thinking about how they're going to deal with the fact there are about 4 or 5 guards in this room. And as such, when they do come to a solution, they start terrifying these guards. They convince them to leave, and with that being done, they break into a side room where Batu is being held along with one other bloodied man. Batu wants revenge on a man named Watana, and the crew convinces him to simply hold on. They are going to do something that will level the whole casino. They just need to wait until the casino has emptied. When they entered, it was only about 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and the casino didn't close until about 7 a.m. the following day. As such, we did roll on the miserable headlines table. Now, miserable headlines are not a concept I've talked about yet in this video, but they prove to be something very interesting, especially in longer campaigns. In essence, they are a system which lets you roll either a D100, D20, D12, D6, or D4. And when you roll that, you're looking to see if you roll a 1 or not. If you do roll a 1, you're greeted with one of 66 miserable headlines. And the 66 charts isn't a true D66. Instead, it is a D6 worth of tables followed by a second d6's worth of options on that table. So when you are rolling for that, you end up with one of 36 possible outcomes. And the 7th time you roll a miserable headline, the world resets. So even longer form campaigns can be cut short. But if you're rolling a one-shot, you might even just roll these constantly, which is the D4 option, leading to some interesting things happening. Now, while we did roll on this table a couple times during the session I played with my crew, we actually didn't see a miserable headline during that time. And so, as such, they proceed through the night, and it's not until almost the closing of the casino that they are greeted with a problem. The security guards have noticed that the shift hasn't changed over, and they're worried about this. So the crew decides to create a hole in the ceiling and start killing the guards above them. And while they are doing that, our gearhead, Connor, is going through and sabotaging the power core, which they have also broken into by simply turning the vault door that guards it into dust. So as you can see very quickly, this Nanomancer is paying dividends. And so what is going on now is Evan's Renegade Cyber Slasher has engaged the guards above using a grappling hook that he got in his character creation. And from a distance, Connor is shooting at them with his laser drone. It only takes a little while, but eventually the Shun Nanomancer runs up to try and get into the combat. A guard hits him with a taser, which only deals D2 damage. He goes to 0 health immediately. When he does, he rolls a D8. He rolls an 8, so he's dead because he doesn't have 1,000 credits to pay. That's the end of him. So the crew manages to get Batu out. The power core explodes. The entire facility goes up in flames. And at the end of the day, they go back to find Charlie not at the bar. And Batu offers them as payment for helping him with his little mission. They're offered a police car. They're offered a place to stay for a couple days underneath Batu's bodega that he owns in the local area, while they look for Charlie Sands and hope to recoup their payment. And that is where the session ended. Now, leveling up in this game is not something done through point buy as it is in Cyberpunk Red, or by experience gain as it is in D&D. It is instead discretionarily chosen by the GM. And so I've elected to give my players a chance to level up at the end of every session. But it is an interesting system because, like everything else in this game, it is governed by dice. So you can either roll to increase your hit points, roll to reconfigure your stats, which could be positive or negative, or you could get a random item that has appeared in the folds of your jacket. And so it is a very interesting time. I think that this game overall is very accessible. We had a fantastic time playing it despite none of us having any experience with the system or the game itself or Morkborg, its predecessor, at any point. So we had a great time. And I think that if you enjoy darker stories in a darker apocalyptic world that does not care even as much as Cyberpunk Red does about the players, then you will have a good time, especially if a more rules heavy system like Cyberpunk Red is driving you away because you're not looking forward to learning half the book for rules and instead just want to get a lightweight game in. So I will show off a couple of the things at this point in the video, such as the back spread. And if you want to pause to look at any of these details, you certainly can. This back spread largely explains how the game is supposed to play. It is more or less a GM screen. There's the front spread, which is just kind of random names and items, so that if you are running and you want something cool to throw in, you have the ability to throw it in. And then beyond that, the game itself is, by and large, very accessible. It's very cheap. It's only about $25 for the digital copy, and it has full Foundry support. So if you and your friends want to get in, you can do so relatively inexpensively. But overall, that's going to do it for this video. My name is Emmerron. I hope you all have a wonderful morning, evening, or afternoon wherever you are in the world. Stay healthy, stay safe, and I'll see you on the streets of Psy.